welcome to Rome! Okay, or rather in what remains of it, after all the neighbors decided to turn Byzantium into a free catering service. Byzantium in 1337 is an absolute dumpster. So instead of cleaning it up, I just burned it down. I left 2 provinces, cut out the cancer of the old system and started from scratch. The result? Less than 200 years later, I restored the Eastern Roman Empire, at the same time subordinating the most powerful neighbor, namely Egypt. Now, the Roman legions are marching to reclaim the keys to Paris, Cordoba and Rome, all of this to restore the Roman Empire. Greetings imperialists, Lucas here, and you dear viewer, if you wish, can pick up your keys at a good price from this channel's partner, the ENEBA store. Promo codes and information about the latest deals are in the description of this video. Remember, for them to work, you need to click my link. Yes, this is the second episode. I placed a link to the first part in the description in case you missed it. The goal of this campaign is to create the Roman Empire, and I am still missing a few provinces to do so. However, in today's episode, I will be destroying empires and showing you how to do it effectively. And of course you are right, the Roman Empire is currently bugged and as Byzantium I cannot form it. Fortunately, there is a modification in the Steam workshop that makes it easier to form the Roman Empire, which is why I do not have it enabled. However, it changes the Roman Empire to a tier 5 form of government. Because of that, Byzantium can then form this country. I will enable this modification only at the moment when I fulfill the normal conditions that are in the game. Unless Paradox patches it earlier, but I somehow do not believe that. Never mind. I will start by presenting the current situation, because I played on my own for a few years. Economically, I am doing quite well. I have over 1000 gold of pure income. However, a value shift is ahead of me, so my income will probably drop in the near future. But then, at the end of this path, it will skyrocket incredibly. The values I will be changing are, of course, serfdom to free subjects, and traditional economy to capitalist economy. This is necessary to ensure a large population growth, keep up with converting peasants into burghers whom I will need in large numbers, and achieve incredibly high production efficiency of buildings. In other words, I will need fewer basic resources to produce more. All of this will begin very soon because I am nearing the end of the Age of Discovery. And the Age of Reformation will begin. Thanks to this, I will be able to unlock a lot of second-tier production, which will increase the production efficiency of my buildings, and basically for every type of good. From technology, I also received many better bonuses to the production of basic goods, which is why serfdom and the traditional economy are losing their importance. Besides that, from newly conquered markets that are farther away, I will be importing many basic resources, because control there is simply not very high. And it is more profitable for me to produce basic resources here. And the heart of my empire's production will be located here in Constantinople, as well as in coastal cities. As for the land army, at the moment I have slightly over 50,000 regular troops. For besieging fortresses, I use this kind of army composition, while for fighting battles, I use pure cavalry. I no longer use levies, although I must admit that I have a problem with conscripts, and I will be working on increasing their numbers. My fleet consists of 200 ships, but they are mostly galleys, so a fleet reorganization awaits me. Because, to be honest, galleys are not performing very well at the moment. When it comes to naval presence across all the seas I control, I have a big problem with vassals because I simply have too many of them. And some of them are simply too large. And it would be good to get rid of most of these vassals before the Age of Absolutism, because in the Age of Absolutism they become much less loyal. And I already have quite a serious problem with that, which unfortunately will also hurt my budget, because I will have to spend a lot of money on diplomacy. Antagonism. Yes, the list of countries that are hostile toward me is very long, but these are such weak countries that there is no point in worrying about them. However, as you can see in the attached image, some decent powers will join the list of these countries in the near future. But I have prepared a certain strategy here that may prevent this, because France itself, while it does not pose a threat, can still make my life difficult. Although once I begin my conquests, I will have to wage wars practically until the end of the playthrough. The general situation in the world looks rather standard, as is currently the case in Europa Universalis 5. The Holy Roman Empire is divided between France and Bohemia. In Italy, 3 countries dominate: Milan, the Papacy and Naples. This is actually a favorable situation. Iberia, well, nothing has really changed here for 200 years. And I really like the fact that Morocco has a foothold in Granada. If anyone is interested in Eastern Europe, there is quite a mix here, and basically the Teutonic Order, Kievan Rus and Moscow are in charge. In the Far East there are also no changes. There exists some larger principality with which I will probably fight 1 or 2 wars in the future. I cannot see India yet, but if I discover it, I will try to establish better trade routes there. Although even now goods from India are already flowing to me, just in small quantities. Religion in my empire looks as follows, and in fact my vassals have converted it to orthodoxy, and that is precisely why they are disloyal. But I checked it, they are working and converting, which incidentally will be visible shortly afterward. Well, since I have shown you the current situation, I will move on to plans for the future. I will start with actions that must take quite a lot of time, because these are changes to national values. I will focus on introducing free subjects. To speed up this process, I simply distribute most of the privileges that have this modifier. Almost all of them are for the peasants. In fact, the easiest way to check this is simply to hover over a given value and see what you can influence it with. I am also changing reforms in the government. For example, I am getting rid of this agricultural reform. And it is worth taking something that increases, for example, base parliamentarism, because it will be easier to pass changes in the law, and that is also ahead of me. And already now, free subjects are being introduced very quickly in my empire. Yes, the advisor also helps with this. The next step is to improve a few markets, because unfortunately they overlap heavily here, which makes them less efficient. So for now I will dismantle Alexandrian trade. I also need to increase spending on stabilities, because the changes I made affected it very negatively. However, thanks to this, I will obtain one gigantic market that will bring me goods from India. Yes, I will earn quite a lot from this, because in this trade region I kept Alexandria, which I developed to the maximum and unfortunately did not make much use of it. And now this number of marketplaces will finally start working for itself. At this stage of the playthrough, I am also basically building very large numbers of level 2 paper mills, as well as book producing workshops, because as you can see, I earn quite a lot from it. I also export gigantic amounts of books to other markets, which causes the AI not to upgrade these facilities in their own territory. Unfortunately, this leads to the need to spam basic textile workshops everywhere possible, because they produce the basic resource for paper production, and they also make money on their own. When it comes to such civilian buildings, you also have to watch tool production very closely, because tools are practically needed for everything, which can cause you to be short on a lot of iron, and this problem is usually solved by the building that needs to operate, that building that needs that building, and that one in turn needs tools to operate. A simple production loop. And along with building a larger army, the demand for weapons and leather will increase enormously, then firearms and artillery will also be added, and armaments industries will also earn new money, and while all of this is building up nicely here, I can begin my preparations to conquer Tunis and Morocco. Therefore, for this purpose, I prepared new religious casus belli. Oh, just as usual, I want to attack someone, and they are at war and losing it at that. What is worse, I am actually interested in acquiring these locations from Tunis, the first parliament, and I basically use it to change laws, changing mining rights to those that favor free subjects. Ultimately, however, I will be changing them to ones favoring burghers. I'll probably forget to mention it later. Less than half a year later, Tunis ended its war with the Pope, so now I can carry out an invasion as well. And I will also attack Morocco separately. Without much trouble, I land my armies on the vassal's territory, and with my siege armies I advance toward the Tunisian capital. Unfortunately, in this region I have to be careful, because malaria occurs here. It can literally decimate any army, but fortunately armies gain disease resistance over time, and basically an army's resistance remains until the units are upgraded, or the army is completely disbanded and raised again. That is why levy armies often die out. Sigh, the first war, and immediately a rebellion. Well, at least my vassals will be useful for something, but the revolt lasted quite a short time. Meanwhile, in Tunisia, I was destroying my opponent's armies one by one, with cavalry. And I must admit that this war is really all about besieging successive fortresses, with cavalry somewhere in the back, and as soon as I spot the enemy, I slam into their army. Unfortunately, in this era, storming fortresses does not work very well yet. The farther I moved from my vassals' lands, the more I had to supply my armies with food, and I had not even reached Morocco yet. And unfortunately my war probably lasted a bit too long, there were a lot of fortresses to conquer here. But I see that now Morocco has also been attacked by Castile and Portugal, and they have taken the locations I need. Therefore, for now, I take a single foothold from Morocco so that I have supply for my army for the next war, and with Tunisia I conclude the following peace. I surround its capital to cut it off from the rest of the country's land territory, and take two locations that are good in terms of ports. I do the same in Sardinia and Sicily. This tactic causes proximity to spread much more poorly. As a result, it will lower control in the locations, and the lower it is, the fewer war score points need to be spent during conquest. Of course, it could not be perfect, because some annoying rebellions appeared. Strange Chinese rebellions, which I cannot defeat, because I cannot even see a route to my opponents. I am already integrating all these newly conquered locations. I will not be creating vassals here. Additionally, I will be dismantling every fortress I capture, because it is easier to deal with rebellions then, and those will come. If I were to have a vassal here, I would probably not dismantle the fortresses. After this first war with Tunisia, I could calmly focus on expanding my training fields. These are like barracks, but for villages. Before I take on larger countries, I need to increase my number of reservists as much as possible. Unfortunately, by building training fields, I also increase the demand for weapons, which in turn increases the demand for iron. The problem is that Byzantium is not particularly rich in this resource. Iron here, iron there. It does occur outside Constantinople, but it is still not as much as, for example, in Poland. And here I recommend doing the following: turn off the filter and switch to all markets. Then choose a specific resource, in this case iron, and first build the RGOs available within the country, or through iron foundries, but here you will need a lot of coal, meaning a lot of wood. Then this iron should automatically be transferred if it is needed on that production market. If something still does not work, you can always set it manually. The year 1537 marks the beginning of the Age of Reformation, and here I had to face a very difficult choice. Additional tolerances are very useful, especially for an Orthodox country. And since I am conquering so much, if I manage to have positive tolerance here and here, I would not have to worry about religious unity. But on the other hand, in diplomacy, additional tax efficiency is always a strong choice. Even more important is cabinet efficiency plus 20%. Let me remind you, this statistic affects all cabinet actions, but the most important statistic, because it is hard to obtain, is trade maintenance costs. How strong this statistic is, I showed in the last episode with the Merchant Republic. This is a damn hard choice. Alright, but in EU4 it always worked well to go for tolerance when you had large conquests. So here I will follow exactly the same logic. It usually meant far fewer rebellions. Unfortunately, passive self-conversion of locations is quite low when it comes to villages and only slightly higher in cities. In this era, two new national values also appear: mercantilism versus free trade, and honestly mercantilism seems much stronger to me, although I would also like to hear your opinion here. But here are those trade costs. And yes, right after that I went to war with Morocco and Venice. Unfortunately, for some reason Morocco took an alliance with Venice, but maybe I will be able to use this to my advantage, especially since my army has undergone a reorganization, and I basically standardized everything to 20. I also disbanded my separate cavalry armies. At present my armies win battles without much trouble, and the real obstacle are fortresses. There are simply a huge number of them to besiege. But returning to the war. First, I bought military access from Hungary for my armies, but even more important was purchasing access to food supplies. Otherwise, the army would have died on the way. Unfortunately, that did not mean that I would receive this food beyond Hungary's borders. Therefore, I had to capture fortresses toward the sea as quickly as possible. And then I would supply that army with my fleet, which I also expanded. Transport ships have increased food supplies, although I will really need a lot of that food because my armies are over the limits. I adopted a slightly different solution, which required at least two armies. One army besieged fortresses, the other retreated to Hungarian territory to replenish manpower and food supplies. When it did that, it returned to besieging fortresses, and the first army swapped places with it. At this point, Hungarian territory is effectively treated as if it were my own, which is actually nice and very useful, because I am constantly still fighting battles with Venetian troops as well as their vassals. They may not be very bloody, but I do take losses. With more infantry, I am also already storming fortresses. This army template handles even larger enemy armies well, inflicting several times greater losses on them. Interesting, the capital of Milan is not Milan. Why do these bots keep moving their capitals? And so stupidly to Lucca. After all, that gives them worse proximity, but it works to my advantage, because I had easier access to the capital, which allowed me to conclude a white peace with them quite quickly. Instead, I will take advantage of the fact that Venice is in this war. and completely cut off Venice's mainland territory from the capital. As a result, control dropped from this level to this level. I practically killed Venice at this point. So then I happily loaded my troops onto ships, and it was time to set off for Morocco, where I very quickly captured the war goal, namely Fez, although that assault was more difficult. After the assaults, unfortunately, I had to retreat the army to my own territory, otherwise I would not replenish manpower. In Morocco, I do practically the same thing as in Venice. I cut off the capital from the rest of the country, plus I take 2 locations in Granada. Just in case, I practically killed Morocco as well. Oh, I have a civil war. When did that break out? Okay, after the war with Morocco, I got to work on transforming the fleet. I basically scrapped all my galleys, and in their place I will create fleets consisting of 30 caravels and 5 or 10 heavy escort ships. Both ship types are much more effective at increasing naval presence. Heavy ships, on the other hand, massacre galleys. Unless you have a different opinion, then share it in the comments. I am also increasing my invasion fleet so that it can transport a total of over 30,000 troops, and for this fleet I will make around 40 heavy ships as escorts. Fleets in battles in EU5 work differently than in EU4. Basically, warships always take the first fire, that is galleys and heavy ships. Just make sure to click this balance option before the battle, because then it correctly distributes the ships within the fleet. In the year 45, I practically reached the maximum of what I could gain from free subjects. And now I turn my attention to the capitalist economy. Just like before, I took all the laws and privileges that strengthened the process toward capitalism. After the war with Venice, I noticed that I had not generated any antagonism with that country. This was still a moment in this campaign when I misunderstood this mechanic. But I will explain it later using France as an example. And now more wars lay ahead of me. The second war with Tunisia was so fast that I still did not manage to show you anything from it. I was mainly besieging fortresses and basically taking all the territories that give me the lowest possible control, because that costs me the fewest war score points. And once again, I am cutting off the rest of Tunisia from the capital. I am also not conquering anything from vassals, because I might be able to inherit them later. Do not worry too much about antagonism either, because it can be easily improved with vassals. In fact, it is surprisingly easy, which I can show you using the example of Bozok, where I had over 400 points of antagonism and now I have 0. And I took it over less than 50 years ago. How I regret that I did not realize at this moment how this mechanic works. Right after that, I declared another war on Morocco, probably now the second one. I also allowed a coalition to form against me here. Mainly because I wanted my vassals to have something to do and to attack those Iranian countries. Oh, one country. I think I rushed into this war. Moroccan troops no longer posed any challenge to my army. And then I proceeded further with my favorite tactic, namely assaulting and retreating to my own territory, then assaulting another fortress and retreating again. Only once again Morocco was attacked by the Castilians. And unfortunately, from what I can see, Morocco will still take another 2, maybe 3 wars. Therefore, I take peace for the maximum number of war points. I am no longer worried about the coalition at all. But why is Milan here? What is even more interesting is that even France got over 20 points. In this period, what was funny was that I still did not understand the antagonism mechanic at all. And I was wondering why I had over 40 points with France and 0 with Castile. And stupid me! I also thought that it would just decay on its own. And honestly, I really wanted the coalition of these states to form at the right moment. Never mind, at that point I still did not know about it. In the meantime, while I was fighting these wars with Morocco and Tunisia, I often used parliament options to integrate provinces. Another agenda that I also often choose here is one that speeds up the conversion process, or when I could build a lot of needed buildings for next to nothing. I have already achieved almost maximum prosperity, which thanks to cheap food and food reserves incredibly accelerated population growth, which can be seen in these numbers. The conquests of Tunisia and Morocco lasted another 10 years, and in the meantime my research queue basically freed up. The age of Reformation is probably the hardest era in which I can decide what to research first. There are a lot of powerful technologies here that are worth getting as quickly as possible. In confessionalism, there are many laws that will affect, for example, how much you earn, quite useful bonuses for waging wars, or ones as strong as an additional cabinet slot, or an extra government reform. Religious tolerance always means a more stable country. An additional building that affects how proximity spreads across the entire country, and further laws that affect legitimacy, global trade. In short, you can invent practically the second level of every production building here, which will increase the building cap and production efficiency in every location. Siege artillery. This institution is incredibly important when it comes to army development. Besides that, more effective minting of your own coin will also be useful. But I will finally get new unit types and ones that will be very effective at assaulting. The second level of buildings that produce equipment for the army. Really tough choices, but first I will go in the direction of strengthening my authority. Then, so that I can quickly finish those easier conquests, cheaper synods will also come in handy. Then I will take care of building the economy. Because without an economy, I will not be able to afford a large number of modern troops anyway. So yes, I am researching across the board up to this level. I want to have everything, then better tools, and then basically the entire path here toward cheaper trade. This will positively affect the whole economy. And only then will I research military matters. First the arsenal, because I will probably have to cover the country with them, then better infantry, better cavalry, better artillery, then maybe things like better docks will also come into play. And then I will see what I pick up. For example, it would still be useful to work on that tolerance. What is worse, researching all of this will take a really long time, specifically until the year 92. And as you can see, expansion in my country continues. Base tax has exceeded 10,000. A practically vertical growth line. Look how rich my locations are. And these are basically all cities. I also used these 20 years to expand a large number of cities and also added a few towns. I simply started running out of space in those cities. My new fleet did a very good job, as can be seen from this naval presence. Thanks to this, I have many good locations along the coastline. And basically, all of those at the 70 to 80% level, I am already trying to convert into cities and build industry there. Because I am literally running out of building slots. Realistically, expanding the economy should still take me another 10 years. Because unfortunately, I still have to maintain a very high level of diplomatic spending to annex my vassals. I significantly expanded my armies to over 100,000. And I am still using exactly the same template, 20 of everything. So far, I am performing satisfactorily in battles, which can be seen from the fact that I have captured practically the entire coast of North Africa, although ahead of me was already the real test of these armies, as well as solving the riddle of antagonism. The conquest of such large and powerful countries as Castile, France and Naples I divided into several stages. The first stage is establishing a foothold next to each major state. Following the model you can see in Portugal and Castile. Waging wars without such footholds is an absolute massacre. I already have a foothold in Venice and near Naples as well. I have been doing this for about 300 years now. So I still need a piece of land next to Milan and the Papacy, as well as a piece of land between France and England. That would be ideal because it would make the next stage easier. The second stage will simply be killing each of these countries. That is exactly what I did to Venice and Morocco, where I cut off the capitals from the rest of the country, which caused a slow decline in control. Because I hope you remember that a location without control receives gigantic penalties, and the income from such locations is basically none. Next, where possible, taking over the capitals or moving the centers of trade. Finally, through the economic action of embargo, cutting these countries off from markets. This should lead to the collapse of each of these countries, both economically and militarily. In the first two stages, controlling antagonism and preventing coalitions will be very important. And I must admit that I wasted the last 30 years in this regard. Antagonism in the game is a very poorly explained mechanic, and it is also hard to find any reliable sources online. In short, with each country we have some base value of antagonism, which can be seen exactly in this part of the tooltip. Religious differences, differences in values, different forms of government, and so on. Usually these are small values. The main source of antagonism, however, is all kinds of conquests. Many factors influence antagonism gained per province. If you want, I can prepare a separate guide on this. However, one of the two main statistics that reduces this antagonism from gaining provinces is diplomatic reputation. The higher the diplomatic reputation, the less antagonism you will gain. But the antagonism gained is also influenced by legislation. The higher this statistic, the less antagonism you receive, even though there is nothing about this in the tooltip. So what do you do when you have already accumulated this antagonism? There is passive decay, but only for the antagonism gained through peace treaties. However, this value is not very large. You can increase it only with prestige, but not by very much. Antagonism, however, can be negated by improving relations, and I deliberately use the word negated, not reduced. And generally, by improving relations, I do not know how these two statistics differ from each other, but I mean this diplomatic action. If you add up all these values that are in this tooltip, you will get that total. In other words, by default, a country needs 50 antagonism to enter a coalition. However, if you improve relations by a base of 100 points, then that country will need 150 antagonism to enter a coalition against you. This surplus antagonism is displayed here. The problem arises when these two values cancel each other out. Then you get incorrect information that you have no antagonism with a given country. Even on the map, you can increase this base value of improving relations. As you can see, mine is 187. I do this thanks to this cabinet action. Although I have also seen technologies and forms of government that increase this statistic. So yes, my mistake was that over the last years I did not improve relations with these countries. Because of that, I wasted a lot of time. But at least I used that time to expand my country's economy. Overall, first of all, I go to the list of all buildings and simply upgrade them to level 2 in order, starting with the most profitable ones. Here it is sometimes worth turning off those filters. Maximizing production will only really begin after upgrading to the second level. And I do this with every new type of building that I invent. Although I also have to admit that it is very important to start taking care of food. For this purpose, this map can be useful. Personally, I go through all those places where I have a large negative food production within a province and try to increase that production even using buildings from the worker category. The ideal situation is such that within a single trade area, you naturally come out with a surplus here, which for example, I am currently not doing in Constantinople, which forces me to import quite a lot of food from other markets. On a massive scale, I am already expanding villages into farms. And I think in a moment I will even be building fishing harbors. Only that means I will need a really large amount of tools as well as clay. Otherwise, in about 50 years there is a high chance that a famine epidemic will occur. And here I will probably be facing a significant population decline. Yes, a small ice age lies ahead of me, which triggers after the year 1630. Although my contingency plan is to demolish all the cities in this region and turn it into the granary of my empire. But never mind, it is time to prepare for wars, so I am positioning my armies. I will still expand my forces by another 2 to 3 armies, so as to drop below 3000 manpower growth. I use Parliament to fabricate a casus belli on those Aragonese provinces that it holds in Tunisia, and when the last new army finishes recruiting, I begin the first in a series of really annoying wars. Yes, this combination is the easiest of those available to me, but in theory, I have the advantage. The worst thing about these countries is that they have a truly large number of fortresses that I will have to assault, then retreat again, and then assault again. And what is even funnier, in this case I cannot use the threat of war to make them hand over the province, because they will simply agree. Next time I will demand the capital. That is probably because in the meantime they become the greatest power in the world. As for the war itself, I will honestly say that something strange is happening here. At the moment when I first click on Castile, it takes over the war and France disappears as a country called into it. I decided to check this. And yes, France is not in this war and the Pope is. First I strike with my 3 armies toward the Castilian capital. If possible, I will try to cut it off from the rest of the country. With 2 armies, I want to quickly take Sardinia, so that I can then shift to attacking the Pope and his Italian provinces. And with 1 army, I occupy the war goal so that the war score simply starts ticking for me. In theory, I am stronger than these countries. In theory, Gibraltar is blocked by my war transport fleet. I hope this will stop the heavy English ships, because they had quite a lot of them there. I took the fortresses on Sardinia and now I am assaulting them. All the more so because I have currently also researched a technology that improves assault effectiveness by 10%. They fall very quickly. On the Castilian front, I tested my troops in clashes with Castile's forces. Unfortunately, I suffered comparable losses, or possibly only slightly smaller ones. Overall, about half as many. From what I can see, Castile is still using levies, but the upgraded ones from this era. Even though I am using outdated units, even when the opponent has an advantage, I still win. The papal troops also stand no chance. In fact, I must admit that Sardinia turned out to be an excellent trap for the armies of Aragon and the Pope. For some reason, they like to land here, and in subsequent battles, I completely wipe out those armies. And I personally inflicted almost 100,000 casualties on them, while I myself suffered barely 11. Of course, it could not go that smoothly, because a gigantic rebellion broke out. Unfortunately, it was so annoying that I had to end the war with Castile earlier than I wanted, taking only a few provinces toward the capital. Then I transferred all my forces to the Kingdom of Aragon. In the meantime, I researched better infantry, and you can see that my armies have grown a bit stronger. Pikemen are incredibly good at assaulting level 1 forts. Basically, with a single army I captured all the fortresses in Aragon. The English troops stand no chance. Ultimately, I established a foothold in Roussillon between Aragon and France. This is probably EU4 sentiment. I always did it that way there as well. After this first war, unfortunately, I see that I need to rebuild my armies. Ultimately, my armies now consist of upgraded pikemen, upgraded heavy lancers, and already the newest artillery. And the template looks roughly like this. Another issue is that I need to build more heavy ships. And ahead of me lies the hardest war against the European powers. An opportunity presented itself, France attacked the papacy, and as a result it is also fighting Milan as well as Aragon. Despite the fact that I did not manage to replenish my reserves, I am going to war. Oh my god, this war is going to be a massacre. First, I will focus on knocking Hungary out. Probably even for a white peace, because for now I want nothing from them. I transport the army to Roussillon and will try to capture the war goal as quickly as possible. The French army is definitely more formidable than the Spanish one, but I also have the impression that I will probably have to remove cavalry from the army because it suffers the greatest losses. To make this war easier, I will infiltrate the administration. Why can't I see anything? What's going on? I see darkness. Ah no, everything is there now. It refreshed after the monthly tick. And I clearly chose a good moment to attack because the French troops are outside the borders. I won subsequent battles against the French forces, but I suffered decisively excessive losses. Another major problem I encountered is that I have armies that are too large and consume too much food. I literally have to capture fort after fort, because that is how I replenish food. The capture of Paris itself ended with acquiring a large number of sightseeing souvenirs. I activate the Orthodox Synod right before the end of the war, to be sure to get that 10% bonus to reducing province costs. I fought this war for literally 4 years. 4 years of assaulting forts and wiping out the French army. There is not much of it left overall. You can see that England as well as Castile decided to take advantage of the situation. Well then, I conquered the following provinces, plus a lot of money. I took over this location in order to immediately impose an embargo on France. This caused the locations that previously belonged to the market to be divided among other markets, but with much worse access. In real terms, I reduced production as well as RGO income by 47%. Yes, this will definitely hurt France. Then I attacked Spain again, and here my artillery literally rolled from fort to fort, capturing them by assault. Ultimately, I cut off the Castilian capital, which hurt this country greatly. From Portugal's ally, I conquered Lisbon, so that Portugal's capital would be relocated. Portugal simply has too many good locations with a good port. However, I got lucky and the Portuguese capital somehow ended up in Africa, so Portugal will soon also be a cardboard country. I performed a similar maneuver with the papacy, but here the capital was moved to Avignon, so I will have to cut it off in the next war. Although I should probably be able to conquer the Italian part anyway without much trouble, it was a bit harder with the Kingdom of Aragon. I had to take 2 coastal provinces so that the capital location would move inland, so I still have cutting it off from the rest of the country ahead of me. Now another war with France lies ahead of me. And unfortunately, this is despite the fact that I have very few reserves. Unfortunately, I have accumulated over 100 points of antagonism with France, so it will form a coalition against me. Fortunately, it is also allied with the Pope, so perhaps I will be able to solve the problem of his capital. Even though control has not yet dropped to the maximum extent, it is clear that thanks to this tactic, France is a much weaker opponent. Alright, so I'm getting to the parliament, whose first task is to prepare territorial claims against France. Of course, I wanted to capture Paris, but what's super important, and something I unfortunately always forget, is that I do not declare the war through this window using the casus belli, because that would increase the cost of all provinces by 25%. Instead, I use the diplomatic action threaten war, demanding Paris from France, the capital. And this is the only location a country will never hand over. There's a nice modifier here, minus 100. Gods, so war. And yes, to confirm, you can see this minus 25% modifier here, and from what I've tested, it applies to all locations. And you see it immediately. Although, in my opinion, there really should be a clear message about this somewhere. I attack on several fronts simultaneously, directly on Paris with one army and in the south with another. I'll be capturing individual forts by assault. In Tunisia, I am assembling an army to land again on Sardinia and then take on the Pope. By Venice, I also have an army ready to take these locations, because they have very low control. I leave one army in the region in case the Order's troops show up to intervene. It turned out France was not maintaining its forts. This could be because they simply cannot afford them, or perhaps they're at a major deficit. The same applies to the papacy. I simply take fort after fort, literally assaulting each one, and in my armies I have the option check to automatically replenish garrisons in captured forts. Sure, it costs manpower, but otherwise even a small force could recapture the fort. Unfortunately, the game itself is incredibly tedious and exhausting when it comes to assaulting forts. It reminds me of old EU4 campaigns when every province had its own fort. Still, it's the best way to end a war quickly. From time to time battles still happen, like here with the Pope, but those troops really have no chance. Infantry plus artillery do an amazing job, and honestly, this is probably the point where I need more artillery in my army. And perfect! The French troops arrive to try to retake these forts, and I take full advantage, destroying them in subsequent battles where I have overwhelming superiority. And I have to admit, I inflict massive losses on the opponent. After capturing Sardinia, my troops land right next to the papal capital, which I capture shortly afterward. My forces near Paris have already established a buffer zone, so for now they can rest and recover while I finish the invasion of the Pope. And honestly, I capture forts and their locations faster than locations without forts. Now, to test my theory that more artillery is better, I attach the artillery from my second army to one of my armies. Let's see how doubling their firepower works. Maybe a bit more than double. Beautiful. I didn't even start recording, although honestly there isn't much French army left to test anyway. Okay, the artillery is doing its job. And when a battle happens that I manage to catch, the artillery really creates an incredible slaughter. My artillery is already deployed, the opponent has nothing, and let's see the losses they inflict. Not huge at first, but later they really massacre them. The opponent suffers much higher losses, about 6 times greater. It's just a shame that I take such heavy losses in artillery. After the test, I return to the siege of France. Okay, I was going to take the French market, the Paris one, to finally finish off France, but it cost a whopping 100 war score points. I'd rather personally conquer at least 1/5 or 1/4 of France at a time. And I'm curious how it will end. It's not that bad. Well, my foothold in France is definitely already established. After the war, I demolish forts on newly acquired locations. It's pointless to leave them, because I expect rebellions. I can deal with them faster without forts. In 100 years, my empire has grown significantly, essentially doubling the number of locations I've acquired. Although, honestly, this conquest isn't very fast. In EU4, I would have already finished forming Rome. This is unfortunately due to the mistakes I've made. Next time, it will definitely work out. I also encountered some issues. For example, the Portuguese capital returned to Portugal, the Castilian capital was moved very far north, and the Pope returned near Rome. Which might actually be good, because there's now a land capital I might be able to isolate next time. But I will also conquer many provinces in Provence. I'll probably also take about 2/3 of Castile in the next war, leaving them only the northern locations around the capital. And then who knows, maybe I'll isolate the capitals a second time. For some reason some countries don't move their capital, while others do. I definitely still need to prepare the 3rd episode. Please let me know in the comments whether I should use the Byzantine formation mode earlier or only after meeting normal conditions. Out of 30 vassals, I have 19 left to annex, and unfortunately time is running out. For now, my economy is doing quite well. I have over 12,000 base tax, with over 2,000 going into my pocket each month. And shamefully, in this episode I created that tiny Poland, or okay, the big republic. By the year 1500, it earns as much as my Byzantium currently does, and there is literally nothing to spend money on.